Are you Triskaidekaphobic? Well, if you were, it would mean you had a fear of the number 13. I've never been afraid of the number 13, although I have to admit, for as long as I can remember, when I've been inside of an elevator and looked and saw that the number 13 was skipped, as you can see here, 11, 12, 14, it kind of gave me the creeps, but I think more for the superstition of it that I didn't understand. You know, why are people so afraid of the number 13? That's what gave me the creeps, not the number 13 itself. And how far back does this go? You can see this, what looks like a very old tarot card here, and it's number 13 and it's death. Why does 13 mean death? It doesn't make any sense. The last Black Sabbath album was called 13. Why? It wasn't their 13th album. There's some silly story out there about how the record label wanted them to do 13 songs, but there ended up being only 10 or something. I mean, you hear stories like this a lot that seem like obvious bullshit. Like, you know, they sat around and went, what are we going to say when people ask us this question that we can't tell them the answer to? Oh, just tell them that, you know, there were supposed to be 13 songs or some bullshit like that. Okay, doesn't matter. Who's going to think twice about it? I can remember when I was a kid, the streets in my neighborhood went, 10th, 11th, 12th, and then Spear Street, and then 14th, 15th. Now, there was a church on Spear Street, but who cares? What is the number 13 going to do to that church? I mean, is the whole country, is the whole world just Triskaidekaphobic for some reason? Where does this come from? Well, in order to begin to talk about that, we have to start by talking about the number 12. Apparently, the oldest civilizations we know of that used the timekeeping system similar to the one we use today were the Sumerians and the Babylonians. And they came up with the 12-hour day, 12-hour night thing, which, we never really have an exact 12-hour day or an exact 12-hour night, except for maybe a very certain time of year and a very specific location on the planet. But it's a concept. It's a concept inspired by the movements of the sun. The sun's in the sky for many hours and then it's gone for many hours. But if we look at a 24-hour clock, which another name for that would be military time, I suppose. Now, normal civilians call this 1 o'clock, but in the military they call this 1300 hours. So 1300 is really kind of like going back to the beginning. It's kind of like the same thing, 13 and 1. So if you try to think of this more philosophically and more abstract, the idea that the 12-hour block starts over again, and you layer that on top of the number 12 through 24, you can begin to understand what the significance the number 13 has in occult terminology or perhaps esoteric traditions. Now, I think it was the ancient Arabic tradition or Persian tradition, I forget what it was, that they actually went by the moon for judging time. So, but if we look at the lunar calendar for 2019, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. We have 13 cycles of the moon, 13 full moons. So if you're using the moon for your timekeeping system, you end up with, you could say 13 months, which end up being about, I think it's 24 or 25 days, something like that, as opposed to the typical 30-day month of the solar calendar, 365-day a year calendar. And then you start thinking about how the moon is associated with the occult and dreaming, spacing out, lunacy. I think Benjamin Franklin was a member of the Lunar Society who met during the full moon, and the implication being like, oh, we're loony. That's when people turn into werewolves, right? When the full moon is out. So there's something about the moon, and we've just associated it with the number 13 in reference to the number 12. And in the zodiac, there's this phenomenon of the 13th constellation. I mean, we all know about the 12 constellations, and we're kind of operating on the same 360-degree circle, 365-day year, 12, 24, 12-segment timekeeping system. But with the zodiac, we're looking at the universe, right? Now, these constellations, when you look at them in the sky, they are not perfectly separated as they are depicted here. Again, this is just being done for convenience. This is done to conceptualize based on the reality of what we see in the sky. And somewhere between Scorpius and Sagittarius is this constellation Ophiuchus, which part of it is called Serpens, which I think is actually missing here. And it's darkened, as you can see. And most occult systems have this strange concept of the anomaly, the exception to the rule, the sort of hidden meaning. In the Kabbalah, they've got, Doth, the path going from Tiferet to Kether. It's supposed to be this, it's very abstract stuff. But anyway, that would make Ophiuchus would be the 13th constellation, the 13th sign, if we were going to observe it, and therefore would make it very mysterious. And if we look at the Bible, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Old Testament is full of 13s, which we'll get into in a minute. And but something that's a little more recognizable would be, Jesus and his 12 disciples. And there's this sort of hidden meaning that some people like to take that Jesus was actually the 13th disciple. And when you look into the Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, there's this concept of the many into one, how the Christ would be sort of the reference point, the envelope around the 12. And like I said, this gets very abstract, but we're trying to understand this number historically and how it came to be, get the reputation it has. In the Jewish tradition, 13 is the age of the bar mitzvah. When a young man or young woman, bat mitzvah, is thought to be of age. They're ready to receive the knowledge of an adult. Why 13? Well, it's a good number. In the Hebrew Kabbalistic tradition, it's not unlucky at all. So how did it become unlucky? Some of you may recognize this image. This is an image of a Knights Templar who were they were basically the military order protecting the Pope and Christians from those that would want to persecute them or even wipe them out. But what happened was the Templars, they became a little too powerful. They basically developed the first banking system, and the way it worked was that, say you were a Christian and you wanted to go from point A to point B and you didn't want to carry all your money, you didn't want to get robbed by bandits on the way. Well, you gave all of your gold to a Templar building or bank or whatever you wanted to call it at the time, and they would give you a receipt. So now you weren't holding the gold anymore. You were only holding what looked like a harmless receipt or a worthless receipt. You would travel along the road to point B, and if someone tried to mug you, they wouldn't find any gold because you wouldn't have any on you. All you'd have this little piece of paper that they didn't know what it meant. And then when you got to point B, you would go to the Templar bank or the Templar building, give them the receipt, and then they would redeem it with the gold that was owed to you. So in this way, the Templars were sort of the first bankers. And when they started charging usury and doing, pulling this fractional reserve stuff, spending money they didn't have with the understanding that only a fraction of it would ever need to be redeemed at any given time, they became very powerful. And the Pope and the King decided, we better do something about this. So in the 13th century, on a Friday the 13th, I forget the exact date, they decided to execute all of the Templars. There's rumors that the Freemasons are some sort of modern equivalent of the Knights Templar, which you're going to get a lot of different answers about that depending on who you ask, but there is a degree in the Scottish Rite called the Knights Templar. Doesn't mean that they think that they are the Knights Templar, but it's just interesting that they use that language. Freemasons borrow liberally from history and different religions and mysticisms and traditions. The point being that this seems to be where the, Friday the 13th is a bad day superstition comes from. And if you want to get real technical about things, there's a very interesting page here at betamuna.org, betemunah.org, by a Rabbi Dr. Hillel Ben David. And this page goes way into the number 13 and its significance to Hebrew mysticism and gematria. Gematria is the system of attributing numbers to Hebrew letters, exploring the meanings behind the letters, the sounds, the meanings, and the numbers, and how you can mix them up and come up with different meanings and interpretations. And this is all very serious in the ancient Jewish mysticism. And so we start with a cube, a very simple way to get a glimpse into how mystics think and how they operate. So you've got a 3D cube here, and the cube is thought to be sort of the basic building block of all physical matter. And you can see it's got 12 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 is the number of maximal differentiation. It is the number of lines that border a cube, and according to Chazal, of all reality. The fact that the 12 are all connected in the center is the 13th. 13 is the number that bonds multiplicity into oneness. For example, there are 12 tribes that are bonded into their father Israel, Yaakov. Israel is the 13th. The meaning of the number 13 is the bonding of many into one. 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 Now let's look at this handy-dandy blog I just posted yesterday, where I put all the information that I was talking about in the last couple episodes of Off the Cuff about the Great Seal of the United States and exploring secret society influence or Freemasonic influence. So we've got E pluribus unum on an early version, and then now we look at the modern version, and there it is, the final version that ended up on the dollar bill that you can look at right now if you have a dollar bill in your pocket. E pluribus unum. How many letters does this have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. How many stars are right there? 13. How many leaves are right there? 13. How many arrows are right there? 13. How many berries are right there? 13. How many stripes are right there? 13. What are they trying to tell us about the number 13? Oh, the 13 colonies, right? That explains it. So they're just repeating the number 13 over and over and over and over just to remind us that, oh, those 13 colonies are just great, aren't they? Let's just ram it up your ass and make sure that, you're aware of those colonies, because those colonies are great. So we just need to keep saying 13, 13, 13 over and over. Well, two things can be true at the same time. And if you're a Freemason, 3 or 4 things can usually be true at the same time. Yes, there were 13 colonies, and that may be a reason why there's so many 13s here. But I'll tell you another reason. E pluribus unum means out of many, one. Out of many, one. Why does that sound familiar? The meaning of the number 13 is bonding of many into one. You think there's a correlation there? You think there are people who have studied this abstract stuff that you maybe think means nothing to anybody, but they're sort of correlating it to this. They're putting it right on the dollar bill. What are they trying to tell you? They're telling you, this is what we've been studying, and we're putting it in your face, even though you probably don't see that side of it. We're just going to tell you, oh, it's all about the colonies. Wink, wink, wink. Ha, ha, ha. And their buddy across the way that, knows what they're actually referring to, the deeper level of it, is winking back at them going, oh, aren't we clever? Now, what was that earlier bird drawing we saw that was the precursor to the final eagle that we see on the dollar bill today? Well, that was a phoenix. And this is something I talk about in the blog as well as my previous videos. You can see by the tuft of hair there, that is not like an eagle, the elongated neck. The general look is just kind of funny. And the smoke, presumably from the fires of the ashes of the phoenix rising again. And so with the phoenix, we have the concept of death and rebirth, right? The death and rebirth of what? Well, do you remember the tarot card? I brought up the tarot card earlier. Number 13, death. What is it all about? Well, we have a correlation now. The phoenix is the bird, the mythical bird that consumes itself and burns out and is born from the ashes of its own corpse. So there's your death. And we've got 13 all over the place right above its head. And the original drawing here, you can see these are hexagrams. These are 6-pointed stars. They changed to 5-pointed stars for the final version, but they are still inside of a Star of David, which obviously helps our whole theory that this was a lot of this was lifted Jewish mysticism. And what's more Jewish than the Star of David? Now we talked about the how Christ was sort of the hidden 13th disciple among the 12 disciples in the Last Supper. Well, on this pyramid, let's look at a better version of it. You've got the all-seeing eye, which represents God, which the Freemasons were using very early, even earlier than is generally stated, which we can see with this print right here that I got from a book called Freemasonry in Pennsylvania, 1730 through 1907. This image was created in 1759. It was engraved in 1759. It could have been created earlier, but you can see here. There's the all-seeing eye. And there's a Hebrew word. Now, this is Masonic, okay? This is an invitation to a Masonic meeting right here, all right? Why is there Hebrew letters inside of a triangle right there? Now, it's an upside-down triangle, but just above it is a square and compass, or I think it's just a compass, that looks triangular that has a star in the middle of it, like a blazing star. So we're seeing a lot of echoes of what's on the dollar bill. And you see this letter, the name of God, the inutterable name of God in the Old Testament, which we call Jehovah or Yahweh. And those are the 4 letters way in that little triangle there. I tried to blow it up so you can see it a little bit, but that's what it is. So why are Freemasons so concerned with the Hebrew alphabet and the word for God? And they're definitely associating it with this eye. They're saying that's God. So 13 steps up to God. You see that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. From the many, one. And if you remember when I was talking about that, the Reap J. Lamb theory and the Pearl Jam album cover and the album 10 and the first song of the album being Once, and I talk about these numbers that they're throwing out there and how maybe you never thought they really meant much, but I think they mean quite a bit. I think there's Freemasons all over the place here, occultists in control of things you would never expect. There are influences all over the place. So, from the many one, the number 13. I think what it comes down to when we're trying to define the significance of the number 13, it depends on the context. So when we have an occult piece, an obviously occult-filled symbolic piece of artwork like this, and 13 is everywhere, we can trace it to the Masons. And if you want me to elaborate upon that statement, just look at this blog and I break it all down. And I talk about a lot of this in the last 2 episodes of Off the Cuff as well. So depending on how we're approaching the number 13, it could reveal itself as very specifically Masonic or, something of a secret society, or it could be something as harmless as, Friday the 13th, the movie. Anyhow, I wanted to explore all this thoroughly before getting into the next topic I want to talk about, which is going to be the band, the 13th Floor Elevators.